that part survived because of prayer and being affiliated with some other congregations that were not trying to literally murder me. Um, and so I've survived the academic sabotage. I have a great GPA. I did not complete that research, but part of that sabotage was to destroy my research, to make it lose value. And so what it did is I had to find out what was killing off my opportunities. Um, when I was on campus, went back to campus for that year. Obviously, that was not the plan to be there in that capacity. You already know that story, but got back there and I had problems with employment there, which was odd because it was just a campus and it's like basic employment. And some of the things that they wanted me to do kind of would have placed me in situations that were kind of dangerous. One of the things I had to be careful about was because these white males wanted me to leave, they would try to connect me to people that would um, instigate things so that I would be pushed out of safety. The police knew that I was on campus for safety reasons because I had had problems at home. And so I let them know, I've been having these problems. What do I do? Do I go to this shelter? This is the community that I'm from. I lived here for 10 years, but I didn't, I uncovered this group of people that were really predatory towards me and ended up being kind of even dangerous. And as I look deeper into these behaviors of these groups, these spiritual abuse groups, they will go as far as to murder or to force a person to commit suicide by what they do. And so, knowing that, I shared that with one of the deans, and she happened to be the wife of the police chief for, I think, the West Lafayette Police Department, which was one of the main police departments there, which I thought was very helpful, but at the same time, they didn't have the resources to really help me move forward. And so here I was on campus. The police are like, we don't really know what to do with you. I couldn't really go back to my middle class friends because what would happen was because of this jealousy of this lower income group, my middle class friends lived in middle class neighborhoods. They would cause so many problems for my friends and myself that it kind of like endangered my friendship with my friends because of the things that would be instigated. It was very odd. It was difficult to, but at the same time, my baseline indicator that there was something very much wrong was I went to this middle class neighborhood and stayed with my friend. Within like 2 weeks, I had a job, and within another week, I had an apartment. And so my needs were met quickly and well. I mean, the job paid well enough so that I could keep my apartment, pay for it by myself. But I was just harassed so much at the apartment that it felt dangerous because there were a bunch of men, and I was essentially, I mean, literally by myself. And their behavior, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to respond, how to respond to them. Like my roommates, like they would complicate things between me and my roommates. So, you're watching like this channeling attempt to continuously try to oust you from your point of safety. To go where? Nowhere. There was no safety and there was nowhere to go. I think it just was trying to eject me. And we had kids that would do things like, try to destroy one another within the behavioral, place that I was working. And this is that psychopathy. There is no empathy and there's no problem solving, which is a big characteristic of a mental disorder when you're dealing with these groups. If what they're trying to push you into doesn't make any sense, you're not dealing with cruel people, you're dealing with people with mental disorders, which is a totally different level, even of policing. What you have to recognize is because of their mental disorder, because of the lack of limbic function in their brains, you know, you being murdered or you being killed or left outside with no place to go, um, even generationally within white poverty, that is something that is a norm for them. They don't see a problem in it. If vagrancy is something that it doesn't register in their brains that there's a problem there, and so there's very much a problem the with a forced, attempted making a person homeless, especially if that woman is being targeted. And so the police and I were just like, we found out, okay, the safest thing that we can do for her, because they would try to pull me out in the middle of the night, like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, pull me to a restaurant, and then have a semi driver try to meet me, and I'm like, what is this? I don't talk to semi driver people. Who are you? What are you? Get away from me. It was just weird. And so because I was online with the police and they were present on campus, like there was a safety there, but they didn't prevent me from like being moved from building to building on campus. And so other things that they would try to do is move me from building to building, and like make me go to a building so I would be by myself with these men. And I was like, no, that's not happening. You're not gonna get me used to that. You're not gonna get normal like responses from me from that. And then I'll just start calling the police on you. And so we cut that off by having other students like help me not go grocery shopping at 2 o'clock in the morning, making me more vulnerable to, having me go from building to building for the next few hours. And it, like literally for those hours, right before 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, they were like watching like puppies that are playing with something, and they would just pat me from abusive situation to abusive situation, harassing me, and these are all males. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why was your attention on me? Well, eventually, because they were so persistent, I asked for all of their names for the specific buildings that were bothering me, and I asked for their employment information, and that's when all hell broke loose. But what it showed me was they were willing to do it as long as they were unexposed. And what I found in the psychology of aggression in groups is there's a book called The Psychology of Aggression in Groups, and it's like mob mentality, how mobs kill, how mobs destroy things, how mobs do a riot and things like that, and how do you get groups of people that seem to be normally mentally functioning to respond and react and destroy and murder and do things that are outside of their nature in a group of people. So in that book, she talks about doing an experiment where I had a person that looked as though they were suicidal from a distance. They were going to jump off a building, and they tested like the height of the jump, um, the time of the day of the jump, and the components of the crowd that was around them to see who would contribute to trying to berate that individual to kill themselves, to jump, to try um, to harass them to make them jump. Can you imagine? And these are documented. This is documented like um, research study that they performed research on, and what they found was, depending on how far the jumper was, whether or not the people in the crowd could hear them, what time of day it was, whether it was light or twilight. So when it was dark, they were more willing to berate and harass to make the person jump. But when it was light and they could be seen or exposed, they were not as willing to contribute to the berating of the victim. And so that's what I saw on the campus. Once there were other people on campus, I would walk around and be like, I'm being trafficked. Excuse me, the white cleaning people around here have been trafficking me. I've been walking around campus. I've been unemployed. They harass me when it's time for me to go to sleep. I'm not really able to sleep for very many hours. If they're working, I have to avoid the building. And if I try to avoid the building, and I'll just talk about what I would be going through, they would back off and just leave me alone until the groups would leave, and then they'd predate upon me again. And so I know this is their behavior. I know the psychology behind the mental dysfunction that would allow that to be a norm for them. And I've seen it in psychopath I mean, in psych ward kind of places, wherever I was working with, the people that had mental problems or whatever. So one of the girls there was a psychopath, and she would plot for months to attack, and not just like be mean. Like one of the young ladies was hit with a radio and had a brain bleed. She had to have like an MRI. I mean, they really, literally attempted to not kill her, but to maim her. And so when you have that nature, it can be one person, and they will rally entire groups of people, and that's what White Horse was doing. That's what was going on campus. The only thing that stopped them was surveillance. And so, because I've been dealing with um, this for so long, it ends up being like somebody is mutilating your attempts to survive something. So, you imagine. I watched the Citizen X video. What he would do is talk to the little girls as he drive them, draw them out into the woods, and he acted as though he had something interesting to talk to them about, and he knew how it felt to be hungry or something like that. So he would draw them out, and then he'd come from behind and stab them from behind, so they never saw it coming in some cases. And then he would sexually abuse them as he killed them, and that's how it has been with this process. It's like literally somebody trying to sexually abuse you while you're trying to survive something and get enough employment to not be murdered. I've had other people in my family that have been murdered. I had an aunt whose name was Cookie, and she was somehow isolated, and we would see her every now and then. We weren't quite sure exactly what was going on with her. Isolated her, separated her from her kids, and she ends up murdered. So these are sets of cities where murder does happen to isolated women, and for whatever reason, that might be sometimes connected to families. So I know that and she was a tiny little thing. She was little, like we're petite in my family. We're little women, um, like 5 foot. 5'1" is the tallest girl in my family. So we're really small, really petite. Um, One of my aunts is like 4'11", 4'10". So we're small, and for men that's attractive because, well, you can dominate small girls, and that's why when I was in West Lafayette, you know, uh, handsome as they were, my roommate's boyfriends, to me, they seemed like, virile white males, but I was by myself. And they would sit in groups together. And so the intimidation was, well, what if you decide to harass me and provoke me when I'm by myself with all of you? And, I'm made to seem as though there's some kind of contention between us. So that what I would do is, if I felt that their presence was too excessive, I would leave and I'd go for a run. So I'd go for runs in like the middle of the night, very safe neighborhood, like next door to a golf course and like a retirement home that was called University Place, and then like a few nice apartment complexes and a nice subdivision and a nice like duplex subdivision. So this is a really nice middle class neighborhood, and so I could just go running at 2 o'clock in the morning to get away from the stress and to get away from those men's presences, and they would do what they know would cause me a lot of uncomfortableness. Um, but at the same time, what was nice was my roommates were middle class, so I was finally around my class, but I was being pushed out, and it ended up being because I think the boyfriends were lower class, and that has been a repeated thing. I had a roommate, tiny little girl. She was like 4'11", Chinese roommate. And I've had Chinese, Korean, Russian, a bunch of different nationalities roommates. But anyway, and she was dating a lower income white boy, and he was physically abusive towards her. She was tiny, tiny. I'm tiny, like a child's size, and as spry as she was, like, they would be bleeding from the arguments. And so I told him, I said, we have a home here that, there are international students here. And I am a scientist that works locally. When I come home, I need to rest. And when they get home, they need to rest. And I said, their parents are not here to protect them. So I am not their parent, but I know that if I were, I would want my daughters to have a safe place. And so I told him, if you cannot keep this as a safe place where they can come and be safe and feel safe, then you can't come back. And he never came back again. And so I think I probably pissed off that class, but he was abusive. And he made it so that we all were afraid for her. We were afraid for her safety. We were afraid for, having to step into the relationship. And it was just, it was just a volatile thing to be a part of. So knowing this and knowing this is years and years ago, I think that what happened was there was a chip on some white boy's shoulder after that happened, because he never did come back. But we did have police that lived in our buildings, so for whatever reason, they had like a few policemen that lived in our complex, and so that was nice because they had a presence. They were there, and so if we got too afraid, we could go to one of their apartments or call, the office and things like that. So that was very helpful, and I didn't notice that until when I got back to campus and I was having the problems, and they were trying to figure out. And sometimes there just aren't any answers. So my thing has been, well, what will stop it? Because it likes to shame, it uses shame as a weapon, and so you use shame as a weapon against it as well. It will try to shame you or force you into situations where you feel as though you should be ashamed, when actually chances are you haven't done anything you should be ashamed about, but you're around demented people that do demented things to get control over people. And so what I began doing is shaming them back for what the abuse they were giving me. And so my latest thing has been the serial killer thing. I feel like my life is being pursued by a serial killer, and let me explain what I mean. Narcissistic personality disorder is one of the characteristics of a lot of serial killers, because narcissistic personality disorder is an inflated ego. And what it is literally like a spectrum disorder. You can go from having a normal, healthy ego, and maybe for a person that has like an ego that's probably too small, you might have low self-esteem. Then you have the people that have normal self-esteem. Then you have like people that are brilliant, that are narcissistic, but they're healthy. They're surgeons, maybe. They probably are a little abrasive, but they get the job done. And then you have the psychopath. And that narcissism goes into being godlike. And so some narcissists, to help with that godlikeness, some of them become leaders that are like gods, and they end up being cult leaders like David Koresh, Jim Jones, Jeff Johns. These are cult leaders. They're godlike in their concept of who they are. Their ego is so big that they want to be God to people. And so they become God to groups of people, and they lead populations or communities with these groups of people, and they control every aspect of their life. And what you end up having with that kind of relationship with those people, because they have these people that they take their choices away, then like for example, some of the kids that I worked with, they didn't know how to deal with problems because they were never given the choice to think about things like emotionally or psychologically. Obviously, they don't have, as a child, you don't have the ability to think within like the boundaries of psychology to understand why you're upset by things. So, for example, when I was growing up, I had issues with just communication. I know that I went to Stanley Clark, which is a very prestigious school. It caused some problems in my family. It caused problems in my community. It caused problems with my relationships because I had people jealous of me all the time. Even though I struggled, like I had a lot of, it was difficult. It was very hard to be there. It was very hard to endure, the psychological strain of having kids around you that don't know what a problem is because they never had any monetary issues, and you had monetary issues. So even though I was literally even lower middle class coming into this prestigious school, there were things that I wanted that I couldn't afford. And so that was difficult because like I wanted to do some of the things that they did and I just couldn't afford it. Like fencing lessons. Like I can do soccer, but I can't do fencing because I can't afford the gear for fencing. But I can do piano lessons, so let's do piano lessons and soccer. And then, one day when I become an adult, I can afford fencing. But so, we all have things that we've overcome. We all have things that we've needed to learn about ourselves. And so, one of the things that they taught me, which was very important, and I've always used it, was therapy. And even as a child, like they were very good about making sure that you were brought up to the level of everybody else around you. Even monetarily, like we would go on trips and the students that they probably thought didn't have spending money, they gave us spending money. And like, be offended if you wanted to. I didn't have as much spending money as some of those kids. It was such a blessing. But what it did was it freed me so I could enjoy a lot of the things that I might not have been able to enjoy. That's another thing with these ministries. You have to understand when you're taking on people, if you don't have resources for them, don't add them to your ministry. If you're a ministry that doesn't get any people any jobs, don't bring a whole bunch of young people that have jobs to your church and kill them off. And then talk about how lazy the young people are. If you can't help them get jobs, probably you don't need to bring them to your church. Even my employer, the things that they brought to us were affordable, and if they weren't affordable, then they didn't matter. And so that's adult responsibility. So I was around a lot of people that were physically, psychologically, financially, and educationally responsible and well balanced. And what they did was teach me how to balance myself. Like, okay, you don't have all your needs met. You have emotional problems because you have a sick twin. You have a twin that's in the hospital all the time. There's a lot of stress in that. There's a lot of financial stress on your family. So what can we do to help you? Okay, well, we can give you therapy. And so we had therapy for kids that were just having difficult things that happen in their homes. And rich or not, as a child, whether you're rich or not, you're affected by what happens around you. So when I got older, and I left that school, I looked to psychologists to go, and not like because I wasn't crazy. It was just like, okay, let me tell you what happened. How do I improve that communication next time? Like, how do I love my family. I'm having problems with communicating with my family. This is what happened. How can I handle it better? Am I not saying things properly? Did I say things wrong? Or I feel like I'm being abused in this way, but I love my parents, so because I love them, I want to know how to be me, but at the same time not make them feel as though, they should have to abuse or whatever it was or whatever. And so that was how I used psychologists, which means that I try to balance things because it's healthier. You live longer. You feel heard, and that's even as a Christian. That wasn't going to a priest and giving my giving my repentance, giving repentance to a priest. That was going to a psychologist and saying, okay, this is what happened. We had this communication in our laboratory. I'm really upset that happened because we have to work with each other. How do I preserve my job, and how do I communicate with them without being abused? And so that's what I expect. That's how I live. That's what I do. But I went to this church. This cult leader had total control of these people's minds. His thing was to get information for people to destroy them so he could manipulate them. So he was really good at manipulating. So he was a really good cult manipulation leader. And to the point of manifesting and really orchestrating a lot of odd things so that it would seem as though God was moving or God was present or things were happening in the spirit realm. It was all just fake. So I didn't know that. Anyway, so here I go is this part of my life, and I'm like, okay, this balance with me getting employed but being berated for wanting normal employment after I tried lower income employment and just got more and more abuses finding that I was working with people with a lot of mental dysfunction. Well, you're going to find that in lower income employment. You're going to have people that are mentally disturbed and they don't get, therapy for it. They're just nuts. And in some cases, they're employed because they're nuts. And I was about to write an article for my LinkedIn, and that's not really an article, I guess it's a blurb for, how mental dysfunction functions in communities to stop a lot of normal, productive behavior. And what you'll see is there'll just be a poison in the community. It just seems like it's like there's always a poison running through um, employment. There'll be a lot of people unemployed, a lot of food stamps, a lot of dilapidated businesses, a lot of dilapidated buildings. Um, it'll just look like there's just a failure to thrive. And so that is what I've encountered in a lot of these communities. What I had when I was working at the previous job was an oasis. So I went to work, and then I went, from our lab into that community of golfers and middle class people that were paying for their homes to purchase their homes. And, when you got home, you had worked for 8 hours with your brain, racking your brain, trying to make sure you didn't mess up $1 million study with your, 8 hours of work. It's a different mentality to come home to. But when you are lower income, work is a part of the dysfunction that you're a part of anyway. And so you don't derive any pleasure from it. If anything, in some cases, what I found is they derive a lot of instigatory, or like, because they haven't achieved what they wanted to, or they haven't achieved anything, then they use the job to like live in a really unhealthy way. And the competitiveness that they could probably use towards a degree, or they could use towards, improving themselves, is used on this gaming that has no end point, and it has no goals. There's nothing to it, so it's like fruitless. So it's like fruitless behavior that you would find in a psych ward. But they don't know, because either they've not gone to a psych ward, or that community has so many people that behave in that manner because they don't move education and technical employment forward properly. They just have a lot of stagnancy. And so you have people that just don't have any goals in life. They don't achieve anything. Their goal was to have kids and get on food stamps. So they would choose that. So now it's just to, and so the class and the class mentality and the thoughts behind the choices that are made showed me that if I were a lower income person, this would be normal. But as a middle, coming from a middle class and expecting a middle class income again, I will have another middle class income, because that is what I built. That is what my GPA and the other things that I've built in my life have blessed me to be where I'm supposed to be. And when you know that, not everybody can do what you can do, whether people would like to admit it or not. I was being murdered over and over and over again by these groups of people that were mentally unable to see what they were doing as being dysfunctional, and literally being like pursued by a serial killer. So when I was first here this time, because I knew I was going to play with the same games, and because I knew I had a community of people that were probably going to store and force and try to move me around again, I called the homicide for South Bend and asked them about what my movement might mean. Would you define that as trafficking? Because I know that they killed, like I had a family member that was murdered. She was probably lower middle income, had just bought a house. Her boyfriend was from lower income background. He shot her in the head, killed her, just out of jealousy and frustration with his own life, and he just has like 3 girls, and he just murdered her. And so, being from that class and that ilk, I know that I could be murdered, and it wouldn't be a thing. And so, I called homicide, and then I called the state police, and I have family that live in the neighborhood with state police and have for years and years and years. And so, when I was on campus, like if I left campus and drove too far, the state police would show up, and literally they would just like pass me, and then I think, where am I going? Go back home. Go back to safety. And so um, that was very helpful. But that saved me from coming back to South Bend, which I don't think I'm supposed to come back. I wasn't supposed to come back to South Bend, but I'm back here and I'm trying to survive. And I think that I'm going to have to class it as I have literally a serial killer that is after me. So I have to think, like, how do you prevent a serial killer from murdering you when their motive of attack is mutilation? And I've been mutilated by multiple groups by this process. And so not only law enforcement, but also I'm going to have to shame back and begin to expose the reality of, as a lower income person, you might think this, but as a middle income, middle class person, the definition of what you're doing is literally premeditated murder. And because you've done it before, you mean to incite me to either sexual exploitation or death by suicide. And because you've done it, and I had the other family member disappeared, isolated, murdered. The other family member pulled into a lower class community and murdered. And then another uncle that was middle class. He retired, he had really good money. He had his lower income family come into his life and just push him to suicide. They were off the chain. They probably just literally just tried to drive him nuts and fretting and bringing all these false circumstances to him. Very peaceful, generous. He was literally my other dad. After my dad passed, over me financially, and it was disturbing. So I have my proof and my baseline indicators that your goal for me was murder, and so I'm going to have to treat you like murderers and label you as murderers, and then combat you as murderers. And I thought, what, should I become a policeman? But I don't want to myself hold a gun at all. And I've asked my family. I have an uncle that was a police chief, and asked that part of the family, and they have done what they can. But now I need to deal with these people and these men, as I did on campus, that you will not move me from building to building. I am not an object for you to abuse or to exploit. And I'm also not an object for you to play murderous games with. And, a lot of the serial killers, they don't even have the limbic system present to know that there's something wrong with murdering people. And so I'm going to have to deal with them as though you have a mental disorder. You would murder me if you had the opportunity, but you're doing it psychologically, and because you function psychologically so much, like Pastor Jeff and a lot of these cult leaders, they don't do what they want. They get other people to do what they want. They get other people to kill, steal, and destroy for them, and they head that ship while they're pirating other people's, possessions and lives and careers and professional careers. And so all of those things are going on. This is nice step I'm going to take, and I think my LinkedIn, I'm going to name it Survivor of something. And I had Survivor of Academic Sabotage, but one of my friends said you need to update that, and I do, because this has been a professional sabotage that has tried to be instigated, and I'm including Christian groups trying to pull me into some kind of ministry. Well, no ministry is employment. Ministry is above and beyond employment. And if you think that ministry is employment, then you're delusional and you need psychological counseling and help. And that is probably a part of a lot of what I've been dealing with. These people are nut jobs. They're nut cases. They don't know it. They think that in their little world of religious activity, that is how the cookie crumbles. Actually, you're breaking the law, and you could be held accountable, and charges could be brought against you for some of this sneaky shit that you've been pulling on other women that you won't pull on me. So let's go ahead and upload that to YouTube and praise the Lord.